Hello and welcome to the Byzantine Scotist. In this video, we're going to be continuing our series walking through the scriptures to see if they point towards Jesus as the Messiah. In this video, we're going to be looking at the flood and continuing on from where we left off last time discussing the Nephilim. I do want to put a brief content warning on this video because I do discuss later on some themes within this story that are probably not appropriate for children to be watching this video. So just be aware if you're a parent watching this, you probably want to watch this video on your own and not if your children are around. Now, last time we discussed a little bit with the cause of the flood, where we see that there seems to be a war between the Sethites and the Cainites, where the Cainites are wiped out and we don't see them anymore in our genealogy. And so it seems that we then have this war that's going on over the face of the entire earth with tons and tons of violence, and that's where the story picks up here. It's important to note that there's the mention that man is flesh here. A very important theme throughout the story of the flood is going to be a discussion of flesh. If you want to see an in-depth discussion of flesh earlier in Genesis, go look at my video on creation and the fall. I have a whole slide there on the flesh. But essentially, the flesh is the element of potency within man. And specifically after the fall, it takes on the concept of corruption, that flesh becomes connected with death. This flesh before, it's simply immaturity, but now it specifically is connected to death. And so we're going to now need to see the flesh being cut off, because we see that evil's reached its ultimate limit here. We hear, quote, "Every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." And, quote, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth." So we've reached here a maximum amount of death that's happened, or rather maximum amount of violence that's happened. We've now reached the ultimate evil that humans could possibly reach here. And as we mentioned in past videos, right, when the blood goes into the ground is going to reach out in violence back against mankind. We see this with Cain, where the blood goes down into the ground when he kills Abel. Because man, as we talked about in the creation and the fall, is the mediator between heaven and earth, and he's also a microcosm that sums up the entire creation within himself. And so when he sins, he separates himself from God, and thereby destroys the fabric of the very universe itself. And so we're going to see this increase in corruption of flesh causing more and more destruction of the world. And remember, at this time, there's no death penalty to stop the cutting off of the flesh. We hear when Cain is killed that if anyone kills Cain, his punishment will be sevenfold, because nobody yet has that authority. And what happens? Cain then goes over into the land of Nod and makes things even worse there, and we see violence get worse and worse. And so there's no way to stop the growth of violence here. There's no way to cut off the flesh. And so we're going to hear in the flood that all flesh is cut off by the waters of the flood. And the same Hebrew word here, karath, is next used in Genesis 17 when we hear about the cutting off of the flesh in circumcision. So what we're getting in the flood is a circumcision of mankind. We're cutting off that bad element of mankind. We're cutting off the flesh so that we can end the violence within the world. And so we see the ark as a microcosm. The ark is going to be a miniature world that Noah is going to be built, where Noah is going to bring a little bit of the whole world into it to preserve the world during the flood. So we see Noah builds the ark with 3 stories. If you can see on the video version of this, I actually have a little diagram I've made of the ark. So we have 3 stories on it. Why do we have 3 stories on the ark? Well, according to the Bible, the universe has three stories. I highly recommend A House for My Name by Peter Leithart for a detailed biblical defense of this. But essentially, we have the heavens above. This is the sky in outer space, which we can visualize. We have the earth, and then we have the waters below the earth. And this matches symbolically the three metaphysical zones of reality. So we have actual heaven with God, we have the physical world, and then we have Hades, or Sheol. And so we have this three-story universe metaphysically, and we have here a three-story universe physically, with the earth here being at the center, the waters being below it, just below sea level, and then we have the visible heavens above. And also on the issue of whether this scientifically has to be geocentrism, I don't think it scientifically has to be. I think we just have to have the symbolic picture that the ancients would have seen. Right? And so here we have this three-story ark, and so Noah's going to take a little bit of everything onto this ark. And we also see a window made at the top level. It's very frequently translated roof, but really a better translation here is window. Because what are we going to see later on when the flood starts? The windows of heaven are going to open and it's going to rain down. There's going to be a hole in the firmament where the waters from above, right? If you're an ancient person looking at the world, what do you see? You look up, right, and you see blue above you. What do you see below you? You see blue. So you visualize there's an ocean above you, and there's this thing called the firmament that holds up the ocean. And so when there's an opening in the firmament, the waters fall down. Now, even the ancient people, they didn't take this literally. We see, for example, that the planets and the birds are placed in the firmament. So they actually visualize the firmament as having lots of space within it, and that the water, there wasn't literal water above it that fell through. This is a symbolic picture we're getting, and we see from the Bible itself that they couldn't have taken this picture literally. They did have, I think, a literal concept of the firmament, but not a literal concept of the ocean above that falls through. And so we see here then the waters above, which are going to fall through to the earth, and so that's why we have a window on the top level. We also see the listing of the animals matching the three stories. So we have birds, right? Birds fly in the firmament. They're at the top level. And birds, they symbolize angels, right? They fly around in the sky with wings, and they rest in trees. And trees are God's glory cloud with a wooden ladder to heaven going up. And when the birds are in the trees, they then sing songs, just like the angels sing praises of God. And we then have beasts and cattle. And I think cattle here is just a list for basically all domesticated animals. And they're in the middle level of the ark. And then we have on the bottom level of the ark creeping things, and we often hear about creeping things creeping under the earth, and so they're under the earth on this bottom level of the ark. We also see here we don't see the fish on the ark. Well, why aren't the fish on the ark? Well, first of all, just obviously they don't need to be on the ark to survive. But I think more importantly and symbolically, fish symbolize Gentiles in the Bible, while land animals symbolize the people of God, and birds symbolize angels. So we see here within the ark, which symbolizes the church, the people of God and the angels, but we don't see the Gentiles. They're kept off the ark. And we will then see the waters rise up, and all the people on the land are going to be brought under the waters. Remember, the waters symbolize death. They symbolize separation from God. At least the waters below do. And so when the people are brought into the waters below, they're going to be brought into death here. I think it's also notable that the ark is said to have a covering above it. This word for covering here is going to be the same word used later on to describe what's called the mercy seat on the ark. Of the Ark of the Covenant. And so we're seeing here the Ark of the Covenant will symbolically match here the Ark of Noah as the resting place of God, that God is present here within the Ark because the Ark is a symbol of the church. And so we have then the creation week being undone. So we hear right before the flood happens that 7 days will pass. This is to make us get in the mindset of thinking of a 7-day pattern. And this is really the last week of this world, right? We're going to have the old creation destroyed and a new creation brought in. And so just as the world was created in a week, we're hearing about this as the last week of this world. And so we hear then of the days being undone. The one day that we won't hear about being undone within this pattern is the fourth day, right? Because the fourth day is the sun, moon, and stars, and they're not put under the water. Right? So first we hear about all the animals and birds leaving the world, matching the sixth and fifth days. We then hear about how the earth breaks up. So we hear the fountains of the great deep burst forth. And so we're hearing this is, according to modern creation science, they actually model this as basically the start of modern, tectonic plates, where the land actually breaks apart and starts moving. And the world floods through the water coming up from above. And we also see here the firmament being destroyed. So we hear about the windows of heaven opening up. And so we see the waters from below and the waters from above. They come and they meet at the center, undoing the entire world, right? Undoing the separation of the waters from the waters on the first day because of that destruction of the firmament. We then finally see this image there of the ark floating on the water, reminding us of the Spirit floating on the waters at the first day. We're then going to see the creation week redone. So we see the world recreated here. And while in the first week here, we saw that it wasn't exactly strictly in the order. We just saw all the different elements of the creation getting destroyed after those 7 days. We actually here have a very, very close match to that creation week. And so again, we're going to have all the days of creation repeated, except for the fourth day, because the sun, moon, and stars were never destroyed. So we first hear about how a wind blows over the face of the water. The word here for a wind is ruach. So it's literally the same word for spirit that was used in Genesis 1:3. And so we're hearing about how the Spirit of God is going over the face of the water. And so we're going to have a new creation being done. We then hear about how the windows of heaven are closed. Right? So we have the firmament is being closed. And then the waters recede. So the land comes out from the waters, just as before. Noah then sends birds to fly out over the water. And it's interesting, birds go out first, just as birds are created first. And when the birds are flying out over the waters here, we have fish below and birds above, but no land and no animals. So it's just like the fifth day of creation at this point. We then finally have the animals sent out to return to the land once the land is fully empty there, right? Once the waters are back, the animals are able to return to the land. Noah within this story plays a role of a new Adam. Noah here is a type of Christ because he's going to, in some sense, undo the sin of Adam. Now, not fully, right? Because it's not until Christ the sin of Adam is actually undone. But we see symbolically Noah undoing the sin of Adam. So when Noah is born, we hear his father Lamech saying, quote, "Out of the ground which the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and toil from the work of our hands." So we hear here that Noah is undoing the curse of the land, right? Noah is called to be obedient to God and glorify the world by creating a new world through the ark, just as Adam was called to be obedient to God, and through that he would glorify the world. But Adam is disobedient and so falls, while Noah is obedient and therefore brings rest from the curse. And we see at the end, Noah will enter into glory in some sense. We hear about Noah having these robes that are important here, which Ham is going to try and uncover. And robes are a symbol of glory, as we talked about in the last video. Or not the last video, sorry, the video on creation and the fall, and how what Adam wears represents who he is. We then hear Noah taking on the role of God here. So just like just like God planted a garden, Noah plants a garden. Just like God had authority over life and death, Noah has authority over life and death. But this garden is different. So Noah's garden, right, he has wine. He drinks wine and gets drunk. And as I talked about in the video on creation and the fall, wine symbolizes maturity. It symbolizes glory and sabbatical rest. So Noah, just as we had a 6-day creation, we now have a 7th day in which Noah enters into sabbatical rest because he has drunk wine. And with giving authority over life and death, remember the problem in Genesis 6 is that there was nobody to cut off the flesh because nobody had the authority to carry out the death penalty, as we saw in Genesis 4. But Noah is given this authority to carry out the death penalty. He has the authority to cut off the flesh and finally bring an end to this growth of sin. And as I said in another video, I don't think this necessarily has to be a death penalty. The purpose of this is to remove evildoers from society. And so, as long as we have a way to remove those evildoers from society, I think it fulfills that role. But I also think we see here that the authority to carry out the death penalty is intrinsically connected with being a king. Adam was called to become this king over the world through subduing the world. But Noah does become a king, and we see here that he now has that authority to carry out the death penalty because he's a king. And so the story of Noah ends with the sin of Ham. So we hear that Ham uncovers the nakedness of Noah. So what does this mean? Well, first of all, symbolically, robes show authority, right? So as we just talked about before. And so Ham is trying to expose Noah as not having authority. He's trying to seize the authority of Noah by exposing his nakedness. Now, there are many things in this context which do hint it could very literally just be a story about uncovering nakedness, especially the way that Japheth and Shem act here. But there's also the possibility, some scholars have suggested, and I don't know if I'm convinced by this, but I'm just bringing it up here as a possibility, that there was the role of incest here. Because in Deuteronomy 22:30, we hear about that a son is not to uncover his father's nakedness by sleeping with his mother. And so here, it's very clearly a response to, it's very clearly an instance of sex here that's being represented by uncovering the nakedness. We also see in Leviticus 18 that rape is described as uncovering the nakedness of someone. And so it's very possible here that this is representing incest here. We also have, that might suggest incest, is that Canaan, Ham's son, is cursed here. And so some people have suggested that Canaan is conceived in this instance, and this is what the curse on Canaan is from. Now, I'm, again, not fully convinced on this. It does seem that the role that Japheth and Shem do, where they literally cover over Noah, does seem to suggest that it might be a literal instance, where he's going into the tent, seeing his father is naked and drunk. I don't think drunk here has to mean he's drunken to the point it's a sin. I think it means he drank enough that he became restful and fell asleep. And so he's trying to say, look at this old fool here. Are we really going to make him king? Right? He's trying to steal his authority. And I think that's likely what happens. But there is this interesting possibility that it could be incest here. And so I'll leave that out there. Right? But I think the ultimate point here of why Canaan is cursed is that Ham is going to seek to become king. He's going to seek for power. But as a result, his line is cursed to become slaves. And unlike that, Japheth and Shem, they are um, they're faithful and they protect Noah. And so as a result, there's a blessing upon Japheth and Shem. So we hear about how God will enlarge Japheth and he will dwell in the tents of Shem. So the Japhethites, they're going to build many great empires throughout history. Now I think this can be seen as even more fulfilled after the age of colonization, where we saw the Japhethites, the Europeans, spread all throughout the earth. But I think even in Scripture, we already see this fulfilled when our three last great empires in biblical history are the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans, who are all Indo-Europeans. They're all Japhethites. And so I think that's very interesting. And we hear they're going to dwell in the tents of Shem, right? The true faith ends up becoming this faith of the people of Shem. The name Shem literally means name. And so the people who are the name of God are going to follow along here through Shem. And so, right, these empires are going to convert to the religion of the Shemites. So when Cyrus conquers Babylon, who does he probably talk with? He probably talks with Daniel, right? And I think it's very likely that Darius the Mede is actually Cyrus. It might not be. I haven't studied that much. And by the time this series gets to the Persian era, I'm going to try and do some work to really figure out the chronology of the Persian era, because it is very confusing here. But even if he's not Darius the Mede, Darius the Mede then is someone working for Cyrus, and so Cyrus is still getting this information. And what would Cyrus see? Well, Daniel's going to open up the scroll of Isaiah and show him in Isaiah 45 where Cyrus is named as God's Messiah. And Cyrus is going to see this, right? And we really have no evidence that the Persians are monotheistic before Cyrus. But we see after the time of Cyrus a very clear monotheism. And it's often said the Persians are just tolerant of other religions. That's not really true. They do tend to venerate sort of the supreme god in a lot of these pagan pantheons, but I think that's because these are a corruption of the original worship of Yahweh. And so what we're seeing here, a corruption of that. And that Cyrus, I think, is continuing this, because we do see Persian inscriptions where they were very against actual idolatry and were very much in favor of stomping it out. So we see, for example, in Egypt, we see, I think it's under King Xerxes, where he explicitly talks about how he has destroyed all the demons from the land and destroying the idols of Egypt. And so I don't think that it's actually, we have here modern-day Zoroastrianism. They might have had a prophet Zoroaster in their past, but I think the Zoroastrianism that we see formalized in the Sassanid dynasty is not the Zoroastrianism of the time of the Bible. Anyways, sorry that was very much getting off track there. My main point is, right, we see the Persians as this great force for Shemite religion, even though they're a Japhethite empire. Then what about the Greeks? Well, we hear in Josephus, when Alexander the Great comes to the temple, he gets a vision of God, and he sides with the Jews at the temple, and he's going to go and actually offer sacrifices at the temple. And the Greeks overall are probably the worst to the Jews, right? But then eventually we're going to see the conversion of the Roman Empire. And even before the conversion of the Roman Empire, we're going to see the promotion of Christianity under the first few emperors, actually, where Paul is actually treated quite well by Roman authorities. If you go into the book of Acts, it's really not till Nero that they start getting treated really badly by the Romans. So eventually, though, we have this conversion of the Romans. And what do we see also in the early church? We see the commingling of Greek philosophy, of Japhethite philosophy, and Shemite religion, that God had prepared both of these so that Japhethite philosophy could be used to explain Shemite religion. And then we're eventually going to see, long after the time of the Bible, the spreading of the Catholic Church, the Shemite religion, to the entire earth through the Japhethite empires. And so it's really interesting just how true this prophecy from 4,000, 5,000 years ago has come true. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed the video and thank you for watching. I just want to go over where the series will be going from here. So in the next video I'm actually going to be jumping all the way ahead to the life of Joseph. And the reason I'm doing this is because I think a lot of other people on YouTube have done a good job covering different parts of the scriptures. And so I want to include their videos within this series, and so you can just watch their videos instead with their permission for adding them. So I think Cobain has done a really excellent job of covering some of the book of Genesis in a series he did a while ago called The Theology of the Pentateuch. So he starts with these early stories in Genesis, but he doesn't go into them a lot. So I actually think they'd be really excellent to place after these videos and sort of bring together all the different themes that I've been talking about in these past few videos and tie them together and talk about how they connect to the larger story of Genesis. I'll then include his videos on Abraham and his 2 videos on Jacob. And that's where he ended off his series on Genesis. So I'll do a video then on the life of Joseph and tie together all the themes that were talked about both in my videos and Cobain's videos to look at how Genesis works as a whole and then how it will connect to the larger Pentateuch, which I'm then going to do videos on in the future. And yeah, so I'll include other people's videos, both from Cobain's channel and other channels if I get their permission, to cover certain topics. So that way, this series can really be as efficient as possible, covering those topics that haven't been covered well elsewhere. So yeah, I hope you are enjoying this series and enjoyed this video. If you liked this video, please like, comment below, subscribe, hit the bell icon, share it with a friend. If you're supporting what I'm doing, please subscribe on Patreon. Patreon subscribers have really been helping. I've gotten a huge new wave of Patreon subscriptions. Even during this video, I got a new subscription. And so I really want to thank everyone who has subscribed to these videos, or rather subscribed on Patreon. It's been extremely helpful. For $5 a month, you can get early access to these videos, or rather, you can get exclusive interviews. For $10 a month, you can get early access to these videos. But any amount of money you donate is extremely, extremely helpful, so I really want to thank all of you who have done that. But even if you're not subscribed on Patreon, if you're just watching these channels, you're enjoying them, I'm really happy that people are finding value in my content, so I really want to thank you. It's been really amazing to get to make these videos, and yes, I want to continue to make them, so thank you to everyone who's been watching and supporting me all along.